Hi 60. Today we're going to continue where we left off a little bit with our coding challenge number 2. I'm just going to recap the solution for the Blinky code challenge just in case there were a few people that didn't quite get it finished in a previous lesson. And then we're going to look at finishing up our problem statement. So this is adding a little bit more depth and detail to it, where we will design the track that your robot will follow within the hospital. And then we've got kind of a mini lesson, a couple of little videos on some of the hardware, so inputs and outputs with the microbit, and then some time to work on your homework. So for this video, it's only going to cover the other activities in the lesson. So if you haven't started working on your coding challenge, just pause the video now, and then we can come back to the video after you've used some class time to finish up challenge number 2, which can be found in your OneNote binder from last lesson. So moving forward, just to recap the Blinky challenge, some of you were able to get this done, some were struggling a little bit. Just to go over the results for it, you should have LEDs within your forever loop, and it should eventually result in alternating blinking lights. So maybe you had just one LED and another one over here, maybe you had an arrow. It doesn't really matter where you put them, but you would have sort of an alternating pattern. And 500 milliseconds between each LED light. You could use the show LED panels, but you could also have used, there was like a show arrow. There's a variety of ways that you could solve this. But within the buttons, this is the part that most people weren't quite ready for last class, is within button A, if you press button A, it should show a left-hand arrow. And if you press button B, it should show a right-hand arrow. So this is just the final piece to that Blinky challenge from our first coding challenge. So moving on today, we've got kind of a little bit to look at in terms of the design of our robot, where we construct our hospital track, but looking at refining our problem statement. So we'll get into that. We have been tasked to design a product for a local hospital. They've made a request of us. They would like us to design a robot that will complete a circuit around the first floor of its hospital to assist nurses, minimize contact, and perform a variety of daily tasks within the hospital. This is going to be in addition to what you wanted your robot to do when we completed that first problem statement. So earlier on, you guys were asked to complete this homework task, where you would say, what would you like to design a robot for in a hospital setting? And then brainstorm features your robot might need in order to complete those tasks. Some of you said things like clean and sanitize, or deliver x-rays to different areas of the hospital, or to help kids feel comfortable, so to play with them and entertain them in the pediatrics ward. These are all great possibilities. So these are the things that you wanted your robot to do. But this is what the hospital is asking us to do. So our robot would need to be able to perform both of those tasks, the ones that you would like it to complete and these ones that they are requesting of us. So they would like our robot to be able to complete a circuit, and we'll talk more about a circuit in a second, around the first floor of its hospital. I'm going to show you what the hospital will look like in a second, so we can refer to that and use that information to help us plan. But here are the daily tasks that the hospital is asking us to design the robot for. We can think of these like design constraints. These are the things that we need to achieve in order to make our client happy. So all of the equipment is stored in the supply room, Tower E. This is where your robot would need to start and end its shift. So that's going to be important later as we plan the direction and the route that our robot takes throughout the hospital. And we'll look at the map a little bit to see where Tower E is. The second thing that the hospital is asking is that we pass by at least one of the COVID testing centers. There's the asymptomatic or symptomatic center to collect samples, minimizing contact, and to store those samples and transport them safely. So just to recap this one, asymptomatic means this is where people are getting COVID tests that are not showing symptoms. And symptomatic means they're patients that are showing symptoms of the virus. And then they would like us to transport these safely. So we need to consider that in our design of our robot in the future. It would need some sort of storage compartment where things can be protected and stored safely, and that we can transport them throughout the hospital. We need to be able to deliver these samples to the laboratory in Tower B, diagnostic medicine. And so when you're planning your route, there's a couple of things you have to consider, and one is the order that you go to these different locations. So technically you would be starting in the supply room. So this is your first stop within the hospital. You don't have to complete this one as your second stop, but this one does have to come before delivering them to the laboratory, because you need to pick up the samples first and then you need to deliver them to the laboratory. So this could potentially be your second stop, but then this would have to be after it. In addition to that, they want you to be able to transport various small items around the hospital. So that means we would, in the future, when designing our bot, we'd need to consider some additional storage space, but this also means we have the ability to kind of roam around the hospital in some other locations. So this could be fourth, but it could be in between here as well. Here is what we would call a constraint or a limitation to our design. Do not pass down any hallway more than twice. This is to minimize disturbances to patients. So what we need to do is make sure that when we're drawing our map on the hospital, that we are considering and planning our order and our route so that we don't have to go up and down the same hallway. We need to limit the amount that we go within each hall. In addition to all this, they would like you to complete at least 2 additional tasks of your choosing. So this could be where you put in your choices that you made in the last assignment. So for example, delivering x-rays to the radiology department or going to the pediatric ward to entertain some children. This would be a stop that you would have to consider on your route. So here is what the hospital map looks like. We'll take a quick tour of this, and this will help you plan, and then we'll talk about some things that your robot can and cannot do. So your robot will have a line on the floor to follow, because remember we talked about the fact that we will be designing an autonomous robot that will follow a line. So it can follow this line on the floor. We just have to tell the hospital where to put the lines. That's why we're designing the track. Your robot can travel outdoors on the covered paths. So these sort of gray lines here, they represent an outdoor covered path that the robot can take. So it could go in and out of the hospital in a variety of different ways using those outdoor paths. All the doors in the hospital open and close automatically when they sense movement. So when we're considering the design of our robot, we don't need to worry about having to press a button or open a door or go upstairs or in an elevator. All of the entrances and exits the robot will easily be able to get in and out of. So those are some things to consider when we're designing our path. Now let's take a look at the map and see if we can locate the things that we have to go to and some of the things that we might want to visit. So the supply room in Tower E is located here. This is going to have to be our first stop and our last stop, because this is where we would begin and end our shift, or our robot would. Then you have a choice. You can decide whether you want to go to the asymptomatic COVID testing center or the symptomatic COVID testing center. You could choose to go to both, and that would be considered one of your additional tasks that your robot would complete. So now we would need to decide how we're going to get there and if we're going to make any other stops along the way first. After we've gone to the COVID testing down in diagnostic medicine, down here by this moon, this is the laboratory in Tower B. Again, we can get there in a variety of different ways. We're not all going to have the same path. And then whatever else you wanted your robot to do. So for example, if you were one of the ones that wanted to pick up x-ray samples, they would be in the radiology department, and then they would get taken as well to the laboratory to be analyzed. If you were thinking about cleaning patient rooms, all of these little white circles here represent patient rooms. If it's next to a label, that would be an office, but all of these are potential rooms that could be cleaned. You don't have to visit them all. You could focus on a certain area if that was one of the tasks that you had wanted your robot to complete. Maybe it was just cleaning some hallways. That doesn't mean you have to clean every single hallway. You could focus on some certain areas. The design constraint that we have to consider is how we move through the hall. So we can only go down the same hallway twice, no more. And I'll zoom in to show you what that looks like. We're going to be creating a continuous circuit, so we will need to go back down a hallway at some point to return to our individual starting point, because a continuous circuit is a loop. So you have to consider that when you're planning out your route that your robot will take. What you will eventually be doing, this is part of your homework task today, is you will be drawing right over top of this hospital map. The white represents the hallways, and you will be kind of tracing the route that your robot will take throughout the hospital. So all it will be is just kind of a hand-drawn line with some arrows, and when you get to a stop or a task that your robot was going to complete, you could add a number for that task, and then you could just keep going. So let's say I was wanting to go back down this hallway. This is where I would have a bit of a loop here. I would continue around. Oh, maybe not. It's not going to let me draw. We'll do that later. This, just to give you a sense, this is what the hospital would look like inside. So this is the supply room. Again, the doors open automatically to enter and exit. This is just the hallway down by the laboratories or diagnostic medicine. And this is, again, just a quick overview of the map. Please use red ink, as it's going to stand out a little bit more when you are drawing on top of your track. So I'm just going to take you over to the OneNote binder just to show you this in yours, so you can kind of see what it looks like. When you complete your homework, you have the instructions and you have the design constraints to consider, but you also need to go back and think, what did you put here? What did you want your robot to do? So what other stops might it need to complete in order to do those tasks that you had wanted it to do? So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be zooming in on this and kind of tracing your route. So let's say I'm starting here. This is my number one stop, and I want to go this direction. One tip that I will give you is to draw smaller lines rather than try and trace the entire route all in one pen stroke, because if you make a mistake, it'll erase the entire line rather than a small segment of the line. So now let's say I wanted to go back for some reason. If I turn around and I go this direction again down the hallway, this now counts as my 2 passes through one hallway. So I cannot go through this section of hallway anymore. So remember, that was our one design constraint. So you have to plan your route very carefully so that you know you're only making 1 pass down and 1 pass back. So it's going to take some planning and editing as you consider your route and the locations that you would need to go. You will be completing this in your OneNote binder. This has been assigned to you in Teams, but this page is available in your design portfolio for you to edit. So this is our hospital track task. This is the assignment in Teams, and this is what you'll be completing at the end of the lesson today. So just to recap really quickly, we will stop the video in a second and watch some individual videos. But this is where you can find all of these resources and information to help you. But we're going to pause this video for now and move on to our input and output lessons, which have individual videos for those.